This is the Tamiya DB-01 Durga chassis. I bought this chassis for my wife for her birthday last year. And, there's this old saying that you get people the presents that you really want for yourself. And this was kind of one of those deals. But I did really want to get her to at least experience RC in a real way. And, considering that my first chassis was a relatively simple Tamiya Striker, I figured that this would be something a little more ambitious for her. And since we're both older and more mature and intelligent than when we were in 8th grade, I figured she could handle this build pretty well. And I have to say, she did a great job. I was there with her building the whole thing, but she did about 90–95% of it. And, she handled it very well. I was very impressed. I did, however, sorely underestimate Tamiya in this particular chassis. I was rather disappointed with how they designed it and how they put everything together. The biggest disappointment with this build was that the screw bags were not labeled. At least in older Tamiya chassis, you'd have like screw bag A, screw bag B, C, whatever. And so you'd look in the manual and it would tell you, okay, you need to get these screws from screw bag A or B. This manual did not have any of that. It's basically a series of screw bags, but you don't know which one is which because they're not labeled. And so you got to whip out the, calipers or whatever and try to figure out what screws you need. That was not cool. Shame on Tamiya for having sort of fallen short there. The other part where I think they fell incredibly short was in the suspension design. If you go to oopel.com and you read their review of the DB-01, he'll talk about, how they skimped on the differential and how you should probably get like a 501X diff half and everything. So I won't really go over that. But one thing that I'd like to supplement his review with that I was personally dissatisfied with was the suspension design. So on a normal four-wheel drive chassis, which includes, by the way, my HPI Cyber 10B, which I'll talk about in a different video. That's a relatively mid-end chassis comparable to the DB-01, as well as a more high-end chassis, such as my associated B44. Both of them have simpler suspension designs. So let me explain. Here, if you look in the manual, this is for the rear arms. Doesn't matter, they're both the same front and rear. You have this hinge pin that goes into the inside of the suspension arm, and that's the part that mounts near the gearbox. And then normally, like on the B44 or on the Cyber 10B or most other chassis, you just have the ends of these hinge pins mounting into some kind of a post on either side. And then that's it. And then maybe there's like a little screw on those posts to hold in the the hinge pin. So let's see if I can find it on here, for example. Yeah, so right here. This is on the B44. Real simple, right? You have this end piece, the hinge pin mounts in there, and you just got a little screw to hold that hinge pin in. Real simple. Nothing crazy, nothing esoteric, and it works really well. If you need to replace parts, you can do them in a very short period of time. But on this, what they do is it's almost like they purposefully made it complicated, where on each end of the hinge pin, you have this little ball cup that attaches to the ends. And then that mounts into, some end piece that has a ball cup in it, or this would be a ball joint rather, and then the end piece has a ball cup. And none of this is glued together. So as you're trying to mount this end is falling off, or this end is falling off, and these spacers are falling off, and it's a royal pain just to get both the left and right sides in and aligned and then locked in place before you screw it all in. And especially on the rear gearbox, all you need to happen is for these two screws to come loose and the whole thing can fall out. So that's, you know, that's got to be one of the dumbest suspension designs I've ever seen. And normally, you know, I would not be so critical of Tamiya, but I was really, really disappointed with how they set up how they designed the suspension and how they set up the manual for this. It was very poor. I'm hoping that for the DB-02 they do a better job. Other than that, I would say that the majority of the chassis is okay. I mean, it is based on the 501X. You know, it's all belt drive and everything. Oh, it's kind of poor lighting. Let me see if I can take this off. Okay. So, basically I just used some of my older DC equipment in this thing because I knew that my wife wasn't going to drive terribly fast, so she did not need a hot motor. But anyway, the way you do gear mesh is, let's see if we can flip this over. The motor mounts inward this way, right? So if you want to do gear mesh, you got to take off, I think, one or two of these halves here of the belt cover, and then there's a little hole down here, and you need a long screwdriver to come in there, and then you got to come in also on the top of the screwdriver to undo the motor screws. Okay, maybe that's just a consequence of having the motor mounted the way that it is, but that's also probably why other designs don't have the motor mounted like this. If you have it mounted this way, then it's a lot easier to access the motor mount screws. You know, if you just have, you know, like a long hex drive or something, you come in through the suspension, it should be relatively easy to change the gear mesh, change the pinions, whatever. Really hard to do that on this. You have to disassemble a fair amount of stuff just to get to that. So, not cool. But otherwise, you know, it's pretty good. I think if you want to get this, something like this for someone for their very first build, I would recommend to find maybe something that's not a DB-01, only because the instructions are not very clear. To me, instructions are legendary for being, you know, well drawn out and clear, but these particular instructions and you know, are a little difficult only because the screw bags are not labeled. Otherwise, they're fine. And this is the fourth Tamiya chassis I've built, and this is the first one where they did not label the screw bags. So I just wanted to point that out. Did get a slipper clutch for it. It's a little overpriced at like, what, 40, 50 bucks for that thing. The diff halves that I referred to earlier, that you can also read about in the Opel review. I did get 501X diff halves for the front, and those work fine. You don't need to get extra diff rings. The stock diff rings will work with that. On the rear, though, because they only had one set of diff halves, I used the box stock setup here. And, you know, if you're running like a, you know, super sport motor or just a standard Mabuchi 540 motor, shouldn't be a problem. You know, you just put some rubber cement in here to glue the two halves together. It should run okay. Although I don't like the fact that this bit here is plastic. It will probably melt or warp with time if you run it for a very long time, or you run it, you know, hard with a hot motor. The other weird thing is adjusting the belt tension. It's almost like they purposefully make this esoteric. I don't understand why. But on like the SC10 4x4, that's the only other belt drive chassis I have, they make it easy, well, relatively easy. You just have a simpler, like a roller, an extra roller that runs along the belt line. You just tension that, you know, up or down. So that makes it relatively easy to adjust the belt tension. On this, what you got to do is rip apart the gearbox, which means ripping apart everything else just to get to this. And then you fiddle around with these little notches in here to make the tension a little tighter or looser. And maybe there are some advantages to this. It's not clear to me what they are. Perhaps finer tuning. But I don't understand why they make it so difficult just to get in there and adjust the belt tension, especially if, you know, adjusting that tension is something you need to do after only a few runs. doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So those are my main, I guess, design critiques for the DB-01. Again, I'm hoping the DB-02 will address these issues. Who knows? I suspect that it won't, because it's probably based more on the 502X, so it'll probably still have this stupid suspension arm thing. I really wish HPI kept the Cyber 10B into production, because it's the same sort of price point as this chassis, but after having built both, I can tell you the Cyber 10B is way better in terms of the build, in terms of the maintenance. It's just a lot easier to work on. This one's just, you know, it's a nice chassis, but building it was not fun, and, you know, some of the design is pretty poor. So I just want to point that out. Otherwise, it's interesting. You know, my wife wanted something like an animal paint job, so that's why you see this weird looking thing here, right? Wanted to do some cat type eyes and nose and things, and so, you know, that's what it is. That's a girl's paint job right there, but it looks nice. So that's the DB-01 for what it is. My recommendation is get a Cyber 10B, but they don't make it anymore. So if you want a four-wheel drive chassis and you can't get a Cyber 10B, then just go straight to a high-end one, because you'll probably end up spending, you know, at least as much money on parts for something like this just to make it competitive. So just go straight for a B44 or a XXX4 or whatever. You'll be much happier in the end. Okay, that's it.